The numbers had been swapped. The clauses were blatantly fabricated. The interpreter maintained his confident smile, as if absolutely nothing had happened. Beneath the guise of an invisible waitress, Elena had heard through every single one of those Russian lies while she meekly poured the wine. And so, when she gambled her very life to lean down and whisper the truth into the ear of that ruthless underworld boss, her words not only shattered a massive scam but also unearthed a dark secret that had been buried for many years. The crystal wine glass in Vincent Marcone's hand instantly halted in midair the very moment Elena's trembling breath faded. The suffocating atmosphere within the club's exclusive area felt as though every ounce of oxygen had been utterly drained. The boss' ash-gray eyes, as cold and ruthless as a straight razor, pierced directly into the pale face of the small waitress. Elena held her breath, her heart pounding relentlessly against her fragile ribcage. She knew she had just stepped 1 foot across death's threshold, because in this underworld, anyone who dared to interrupt a life-and-death negotiation of the Marcone family would rarely have the chance to see the sun the next day. Yet, contrary to every expectation of a blood-soaked rampage, Vincent did not lose control. He slowly let his gaze sweep past the falsely smiling interpreter, Julian, and then nonchalantly set his glass of deep red wine down upon the marble table. A hollow clink rang out, a sound that, though soft, carried a suffocating pressure that weighed heavily upon every nerve ending of those present. His large hand, bearing the family crest ring, tapped in a slow, steady rhythm, as Vincent maintained a composure that was truly terrifying. Suddenly, he looked up directly at Mikhail Volkov, the Russian oligarch who was frowning in confusion at the unnatural silence, and then, in a deep, gravelly voice, neither fast nor slow, Vincent spoke in English, clearly declaring that the meeting tonight had to be suspended immediately. The reason he offered was razor-sharp, stating he had just realized there was a filthy little rat deliberately gnawing away at the transparency of the cooperative contract between their two sides. The words fell like a death sentence, and the smug smile on Julian's lips instantly froze. The interpreter began to stammer meaningless words, cold sweat beading on his forehead, his eyes darting around the room in utter panic as he realized his perfect scheme had just been ruthlessly and irredeemably exposed. Vincent slowly shifted his gaze from the trembling traitor, focusing his entire attention on the girl in the black apron standing frozen nearby. Without a single ounce of mercy, the boss raised his deep, raspy voice, ordering Elena to stand up straight and perform a task entirely unprecedented in the history of the Marcone family, which was to directly translate a statement of his into Russian for Mr. Mikhail Volkov. Vincent's eyes were sharp as a scalpel, emphasizing every English word, demanding she convey his remorse for the incident and directly asked the oligarch what his true stance was on the profit-sharing ratio for the seaport. The atmosphere in the room was as taut as a bowstring, and dozens of intimidating glares from hardened gangsters all zeroed in on the tiny waitress. Every sound seemed to be swallowed up, giving way to a deadly silence. Elena clenched her hands hidden behind her apron, swallowing her absolute terror back down. She squared her shoulders and stood up straight, completely shedding the submissive and invisible demeanor of a servant. Right in that life-or-death moment, the dignity of a top-tier language expert who had once dominated international negotiation tables powerfully awakened. Elena spoke. The Russian syllables that flowed from her lips were not only fluent and grammatically precise, but they also carried the perfect, sharp, and commanding intonation of someone who profoundly understood the very roots of that language. Every word of her translation acted like a hammer blow, shattering Julian's hypocritical mask. The very second the final syllable ended, Mikhail Volkov's eyes widened in sheer astonishment. The veteran oligarch instantly understood the entirety of the filthy plot that was ensnaring him. His face flushed crimson with fury as he realized he had narrowly avoided signing a death warrant for his own business empire due to the manipulations of a petty interpreter. Unable to conceal his wild rage, Volkov slammed his rough hand onto the table, growling the most venomous curses in his native tongue, then decisively stood up and led his massive entourage of bodyguards out of the room in pure anger, leaving behind a chaotic mess and a contract worth tens of millions of dollars lying abandoned. When the partner's silhouette had just vanished behind the oak door, Vincent gave a subtle nod. With just that silent signal, two burly enforcers immediately lunged from the shadows, grabbing Julian by the collar as he wailed and begged until his voice went hoarse. They violently dragged the fake interpreter away, tearing through the night, pulling him straight into the deepest, darkest corridors of the club, a place where underworld traders would forever lose the chance to see the sunlight ever again. That the agonizing screams of the fraudster faded to nothing behind the heavy door, which was also the moment the VIP room sank into a spine-chilling silence, leaving behind only the underworld boss, Vincent, and the small waitress, Elena. Vincent leisurely leaned back into his expensive leather armchair, his piercing ash-gray eyes sweeping from her wrinkled apron up to the pale yet resilient face of the girl standing across from him, and then, in a deep, raspy voice dripping with intimidation, he enunciated every word to interrogate her true identity. That a lowly server absolutely could not possess such perfect Russian intonation coupled with such an overwhelmingly dominant negotiating presence, which proved she was hiding a colossal secret beneath that ordinary disguise. Backed into a corner by the invisible pressure radiating from this most dangerous man, Elena bit her lip until it almost bled, bitterly shedding her final defensive mask to admit that she was once a senior interpreter specializing in handling international contracts. Her gaze dropped, holding the shattered pieces of a glorious past that was ruthlessly trampled on, as she painfully recounted how she was framed by her most trusted partner, bearing the entire blame for financial fraud which caused her to be stripped of her professional license and fall into the very depths of disgrace. With the sharp instincts of a cunning old fox in the criminal world, Vincent easily saw through the repressed despair in those tear-filled eyes, knowing full well that someone this talented willing to lower herself to a servant must surely be doing so for an inescapable, life-or-death burden, which, specifically, were the massive hospital bills slowly draining the life force from her severely ill mother day by day. Instead of ending the life of someone who had witnessed too many family secrets, Vincent leaned forward, presenting an irresistibly weighty offer, demanding that Elena discard that humiliating apron to become his personal interpreter, standing by his side to completely uproot the traitor pulling the strings from the shadows. In exchange for such absolute loyalty, the ruthless boss pledged to open his umbrella of power to shield her from all hostile forces, while simultaneously throwing her an enormous sum of money sufficient to clear the hospital bills and save her mother's life from the grip of death. Leaving the underground club reeking of cigars and death, Elena carried the cold, pitch-black business card in her pocket, walking straight to the central hospital where her pitiful mother lay submerged in a deep coma. Standing by the hospital bed beneath the pale fluorescent lights, listening to the dry, rhythmic beeps of the ventilator, she cast her eyes upon the stack of hospital bills piled high as a mountain on the small table, a bitter sense of despair welling up and choking her throat. Memories of a glorious past, ruthlessly trampled by the very people she once trusted the most, flooded back, tearing her soul into blood-stained shreds. The smell of antiseptic rushed into her senses, jarring Elena awake, and she bitterly realized that her cowardly hiding beneath the invisible shell of a waitress all these years could absolutely not protect her family from the fangs of the grim reaper and the cruelty of reality. Her resigned endurance only allowed the evildoers to continue carelessly mocking justice while her mother's life was fading away like a flickering candle in a toxic wind. When the first faded rays of morning sunlight pierced through the hospital window curtains, Elena tightly squeezed her mother's frail hand, scarred by countless intravenous lines, and her eyes flashed with an ironclad determination that nothing could shake. Pulling the business card bearing the emblem of the brutal underworld force from her pocket, she took a deep breath to dispel the last ounce of fear, decisively picked up her phone, and dialed the gold-embossed numbers of the boss, Vincent Marcone, officially opening the door with her own hands to walk into the tiger's den to reclaim honor and life for the ones she loved most. In less than 1 hour after that fateful call, an armored black vehicle quietly rolled up to the hospital gates to pick Elena up and bring her into the true underworld. She was blindfolded and driven through countless winding roads before the colossal iron gates of the Marcone family mansion heavily swung open, welcoming her with an atmosphere so suffocating and cold it pierced her very bones. When the blindfold was removed, striking Elena's eyes was an impenetrable fortress hidden amidst a dense coniferous forest, where the extreme extravagance of intricately carved marble statues intertwined chillingly with dozens of armed gunmen patrolling along the gloomy corridors. The harsh contrast between a girl who always worshipped integrity and transparency, and the blood-soaked lair of a ruthless criminal empire, caused her stomach to churn with knots of fear. Every one of Elena's steps onto the deep red velvet carpet leading into the grand hall was as heavy as if she were walking on knife blades, because she knew full well she had just voluntarily offered her life to the tiger's den. Right as she timidly stepped over the threshold of the boss' silent office, a tall, dark shadow suddenly blocked her line of sight, radiating an overpowering smell of cigars mixed with the scent of deadly danger. That was Tony Carmine, the powerful lieutenant with eyes as sinister as a venomous snake, the very man who was secretly manipulating the chessboard of treachery right beneath Vincent's nose. This man, bearing a long scar across the corner of his eye, let out a sneering, sarcastic laugh, pinning a probing, disdainful stare onto Elena's shabby clothes, throwing out mocking words about the bizarre appearance of a lowly waitress at the majestic sanctuary of the gang. Tony had no idea that the frail-looking woman with downcast, resigned eyes standing before him was exactly the sharpest weapon that Vincent had just brought back to expose all of his filthy tricks. Despite her fear of the beast's overwhelming murderous aura, the keen intuition of a former interpreter who had survived countless schemes in the business world instantly sounded an alarm bell in Elena's mind, telling her that hidden behind this lieutenant's arrogant smirk was the residual venom of the deceitful rhetoric his minion, Julian, had employed the night before. Leaving behind the cold, snake-like gaze of the lieutenant, Tony Carmine, Elena took a deep breath to calm her drumming heartbeat before stepping fully into the enclosed office of the boss, Vincent Marcone. The vast room was flooded with the scent of oak and cigars, where a massive stone desk was piled high with thick files crucial to the very survival of the family. Vincent did not beat around the bush. He lifted his chin, signaling her to sit in the plush leather chair, and directly handed over the entire bilingual English and Russian draft contract that the frauds to Julian had deliberately distorted the previous night. Without a moment's delay, Elena rolled up her sleeves, completely shedding the fear of an outsider to immerse herself in the world of words, a realm where she had once been an absolute ruling queen. Her sharp eyes glided over every complex line of legal text, flipping through the pages at an astounding speed, as her genius brain began to analyze and peel back every layer of meaning hidden behind the dry commercial jargon. Within just a few hours of intensely focused work, using the acuity and extensive experience of a premier translation expert, Elena discovered the fatal anomaly buried deep within the smallest appendices. She was stunned to realize that the petty interpreter was not acting independently, but was merely a sacrificial pawn on the chessboard of a highly cunning and scheming mastermind. Terrifyingly sophisticated legal loopholes had been perfectly planted in the Russian version, cleverly altering possessive pronouns and swapping concepts of jurisdiction to bypass censorship. Elena pointed her finger at a subclause hidden away on the final pages, her voice ringing sharp and cold amid the quiet space, meticulously explaining to Vincent that if the oligarch Volkov accidentally put his pen to this blood-stained paper, the control over the entire crucial seaport system would not be split evenly between the two parties as originally agreed upon. Instead, tens of millions of dollars in revenue, along with supreme operational authority, would be silently siphoned away from the Marcone family's mighty empire, legalizing the transfer of that entire colossal asset to an obscure shell company registered on a remote island. At every clear point of Elena's analysis acted like a sharp blade exposing the true face of the hidden enemy, plunging the office's atmosphere into a deadly silence, signaling a blood-soaked storm that was preparing to sweep across the entire underworld. After uncovering the malicious plot targeting the seaport system, Elena continued to dive deep into the tangled pile of financial documents Vincent had just tossed onto the table to track down the person truly behind that obscure shell company. With immense patience and top-tier data analysis skills, her slender fingers swept over intricately coded bank statements, tracing the faintest clues of the dirty money that had just been funneled overseas. Right at the very last page of the document listing the strategic advisors and legally authorized representatives of this phantom organization, Elena's gaze suddenly froze solid, as if she had just touched a red-hot block of ice. A coldly bolded name slammed straight into her retinas, causing all the blood in her body to feel completely drained: Marcus Thorne. That was her old partner wearing the face of a demon. The man who had single-handedly orchestrated the entire financial fraud charade years ago, callously pinning all the blame onto her to then push her into an abyss of despair, stripping away her professional license and ravaging her life without a shred of mercy. The psychological shock was so brutal, akin to a sledgehammer smashing directly into her chest, that it caused Elena to unconsciously drop the file onto the sheepskin rug, her entire body beginning to tremble uncontrollably. Horrifying memories of disgraceful trials, the disdainful looks of her colleagues, doors slamming shut right before her eyes, and the image of her haggard mother collapsing on her hospital bed resurrected all at once, clawing her soul into hundreds of bleeding fragments. Elena clutched her left chest tightly, her eyes blurring with tears, as she slid down the base of the chair and began to gasp in broken, shallow breaths like a stranded fish, cold sweat pouring out to drench her pale forehead in a state of sheer panic that constricted her lungs. Right as weakness and the darkest fears were gradually swallowing her sanity, the oak door creaked open, and Boss Vincent walked in. The oppressive atmosphere and the ever-present murderous aura of the Mafia leader instantly halted for a moment as he stood silently at the threshold, witnessing with his own eyes the resilient woman who had just used the sharpness of her words to salvage an entire underworld empire moments ago, now retreating into the corner of the room, cowering and agonizingly broken like a fragile piece of porcelain before the cruel ghosts of the past. Vincent slowly closed the heavy oak door behind him, entirely separating the quiet room from the danger-filled underworld outside, and then walked over to pour a glass of hard liquor, handing it to the trembling woman on the floor. The spicy warmth of the amber liquid slipping down her throat helped Elena gradually regain a normal breathing rhythm, and she raised her reddened but resolute eyes to look directly at the ruthless Mafia leader, deciding to hide absolutely nothing further. In a hoarse voice dripping with bitterness, Elena told Vince the entire truth about Marcus Thorne, about how that cruel man had exploited her trust to orchestrate a flawless financial fraud scheme to steal everything, only to despicably cast all the blame onto her. Listening to every blood-weeping word of resentment from the female interpreter, the sharp mind of a man born from the shadows instantly pieced all the scattered fragments together, causing Vince to clearly and distinctly realize that the Lieutenant Tony Carmine and the fraudster Marcus were secretly colluding to form a demonic alliance in order to completely oust him and overthrow his throne. The blazing murderous intent radiating from the tall man did not frighten Elena, but conversely, it ignited within her a flame of fierce vengeance. Right in that intersecting moment of despair and fury, two people bearing the deep scars of betrayal looked together in a single direction, officially establishing an unbreakable, blood-bound pact. Elena swore to cast aside all cowardice, using her very own sharp weapon of words to help Vince defeat all deceitful tricks, to successfully seize the legal contract back from the hands of the suspicious oligarch Volkov. In return for that life-and-death dedication, the underworld boss issued a commitment as cold as a guillotine blade, firmly promising that the moment this power chess game concluded, he would personally drag Marcus out from the shadows by his neck, strip him of all his power, and hand that sinner over to her, giving her total authority to determine his fate. Right after the blood pact was established amidst the suffocating atmosphere of the Mafia lair, Vincent knew clearly that to enter the upcoming life-and-death battle, the woman before him could not continue wearing the weak disguise of a waitress. With a decisive and ruthless order, the boss demanded that Elena permanently shed that hauntingly timid image, while simultaneously instructing his most trusted subordinates to bring in a series of the most sharp, expensive, and power-radiating professional attires. When Elena stepped out of the dressing room, donning an exquisitely tailored black suit that hugged her body along with razor-sharp high heels, the haggard shadow of the waitress who had meekly poured wine seemed utterly incinerated, giving way to the proud and dominating aura of an international-caliber female interpreter awakening from the ashes. That spectacular transformation lay not only in her razor-sharp exterior but was also a powerful rebirth from the very depths of a soul that had once been trampled to the point of shattering. Vincent stood leaning his back against the edge of his desk, his usually cold-blooded ash-gray eyes suddenly turning profoundly deep and strangely calm as he intently observed every confident gesture slowly returning to her delicate face. Between two people who seemed to belong to completely opposing worlds, a boss born in a shadow-drenched realm of violence and a resilient girl who always worshipped transparency, a bizarre, spine-tingling empathy suddenly blossomed. They both carried within themselves deep wounds from being stabbed in the back by their most trusted confidants, and it was the very solitude in a world full of lies that inadvertently forged an intense attraction, highly dangerous yet absolutely irresistible. Every intersecting glance between them now stretched far beyond the boundaries of a regular contract of interests. It was the silent comprehension of two heavily scarred souls sharpening their keenest blades together, preparing to tear through the night to bring down a crushing blow of punishment upon the heads of those madly hungering to usurp power. The silent understanding between the boss and the female interpreter quickly gave way to ruthless calculations when night fell. The moment Vincent decided to host an exceedingly lavish underground gala right in the grand hall of the mansion to assert his power ahead of the renegotiation. The brilliant crystal chandelier cast a sallow light down upon the expensive champagne glasses and the hardened faces of the underworld, creating a perfect facade that concealed countless blood-soaked ambitions. Amidst that atmosphere reeking of designer perfume, mixed with suffocating murderous intent, the grand main doors swung open, and all eyes filled with craving and wariness simultaneously turned toward the velvet-carpeted staircase. Elena appeared full of pride in a pitch-black evening gown featuring a seductively high slit yet sacrificing none of its authority, gently holding Vincent's arm as she descended like a true queen. The massive, bullet-calloused hand of the Mafia leader lightly rested on her waist, a touch conveying absolute possession and protection as he coldly introduced to all the guests that this woman possessing such sharp beauty was his special advisor. The firm declaration acted like a bomb thrown directly into a rippling lake, causing countless individuals to whisper back and forth into each other's ears in a shadowed corner. Near the bar, the Lieutenant Tony Carmine gently swirled the wine glass in his hand, the fake smile on his lips vanishing as he narrowed his eyes to observe every elegant gesture of the uninvited guest. The sharp instincts of an expert backstabber told Tony that the unfamiliar woman standing shoulder to shoulder with Vincent radiated an incredibly familiar aura, completely unlike the frivolous women who typically frequented this place of vanity. The abrupt appearance of a female advisor right at the critical hour directly threatened a perfect overthrow plan he had painstakingly orchestrated. Unable to hide the restless anxiety churning in his stomach, Tony raised his chin to summon his loyal henchmen closer, whispering cold, ruthless orders demanding they immediately unleash the entire underground intelligence network to dig up the absolute roots of that mysterious girl's background, resolved not to let any variable obstruct his path to seizing the throne. While Tony Carmine's hidden calculations were still boiling in the shadows, Elena quietly stepped back from the noisy crowd wearing their fabricated masks, seeking out a deserted corridor corner next to a fountain to slightly soothe the tension surrounding her. However, destiny seemingly had not yet let go of her bleeding wounds, because right at this deadly gala, Elena directly crossed paths with Marcus Thorne, the very man who had just been invited by the Lieutenant Tony himself as a financial partner. The face of the man who had pushed her to the very bottom of hell hardened in stunned shock for a moment upon recognizing the familiar silhouette, then very quickly shifted into a deeply malicious, triumphant smirk. Marcus stepped forward to pin her against the wall, curling bitter, mocking words about how a corrupted fraudster like her dared to infiltrate this place of power, simultaneously threatening to expose that entire harrowing, sinful past for everyone to know so that she would be torn apart by the underworld. The ghost of those humiliating trials from years ago rushed back, causing Elena's breath to choke, her small hand unconsciously gripping the fabric of her evening gown, but in the exact moment when weakness was poised to swallow her whole, a tall, dark shadow resembling an avenging deity enveloped the entire cramped space. Vince appeared just in time from behind her back, confronting Marcus with an overwhelming presence and a murderous aura so chilling it froze the very blood in the veins of the man standing opposite. The boss's steady hand gently rested on Elena's shoulder, pulling her to lean into his broad chest, his ash-gray eyes firing glares as sharp as razors straight into Marcus' eyes, which were darting around in fear. In a deep, gravelly voice carrying not a fraction of a point of mercy, Vincent emphasized every single word, ironcladly declaring that the woman standing beside him right now and forevermore was his person, under the absolute protection of the Marcone family, and any man who dared touch a single hair on her head or utter a word insulting her honor would pay the price by permanently vanishing from this world. The brilliant light of the following morning pierced through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the high-end conference room, chasing away the gloomy remnants of the gala night filled with threats. The Russian oligarch, Mikhail Volkov, entered the room with a face full of skepticism and vigilance, followed by a massive team of lawyers, ready to cancel all agreements if they detected even a single further lie. The atmosphere reached peak tension when the Lieutenant Tony Carmine and the frauds to Marcus Thorne also arrived, wearing the disguise of dedicated financial advisors to suppress and manipulate the chessboard at the final minute. Marcus continuously threw out complex commercial jargon and provocative questions in English aimed at tearing down Elena's confidence, hoping to prove to the distinguished guest that she was merely an untrustworthy amateur. But they were dead wrong when they deliberately awakened a steel resolve that had been forged through immeasurable pain. No longer the trembling waitress or the woman haunted by the ghosts of the past in a dark corner the night before, Elena presented herself at the center of the negotiation table in a sharp ash-gray suit, uniquely calm and commanding. Right when Marcus finished his sentence, she immediately spoke up. The complex Russian language poured from her lips smoothly, clearly, and firmly, missing not a single hidden meaning, no matter how small. She translated the entire truth about the 50-50 profit-sharing agreement and the absolutely transparent, absolute control of the seaport that Vincent had committed to, while cleverly using the sharpest specialized terminology to neutralize all psychological attacks from Tony and Marcus. Every single word from Elena echoed in the conference room like sword strikes slashing through the fog of deceit, laying bare the awkwardness gradually becoming evident on the faces of the two traitors. Volkov's suspicious eyes slowly relaxed, replaced by astonishment mixed with deep respect for the dignified demeanor and profound knowledge of the young female interpreter. The absolute sincerity and transparency in every tone of Elena successfully shattered all walls of doubt, helping her fully win back the absolute trust of the difficult oligarch, while simultaneously solidifying the firm position of the boss Vincent right under the noses of those hungering to overthrow his throne. The extreme tension in the conference room seemed to have been slightly soothed when the Russian oligarch Mikhail Volkov gave a slight nod of satisfaction, reaching out his hand to take the gold-plated fountain pen, preparing to sign the agreement. Right at that fragile moment bordering the line between success and failure, the Lieutenant Tony Carmine stepped forward with a malicious smile deeply hidden beneath the facade of a busy, dedicated man. He calmly pulled a thin stack of documents from his briefcase, gently sliding the final contract appendix, printed entirely in Russian, onto the marble table, muttering deceitful explanations that this was merely a standard supplementary legal procedure regarding seaport security. Standing behind him, the frauds to Marcus Thorne smirked triumphantly. Absolutely certain that the perfect trap to strip all power from the boss Vincent was about to snap shut. However, the razor-sharp instincts of a language expert who had tasted the absolute depths of betrayal did not allow Elena to loosen her vigilance for even the blink of an eye. The very instant the tip of Mr. Volkov's pen touched the edge of the paper, the slender hand of the female interpreter shot out, decisively blocking that blood-stained stack of documents. Her keen eyes swept with lightning speed across the dense Cyrillic text, her genius brain instantly scanning and peeling back every twisted term that was intricately disguised. At the moment she discovered the horrifying truth hidden inside, Elena slammed the palm of her hand down onto the table, a jarring sound echoing that caused everyone in the room to freeze in absolute stun. In a voice as sharp and firm as a guillotine blade, she clearly and loudly translated every single word in that demonic appendix into English, exposing bare the entrapment clause stipulating the transfer of total control over the crucial seaport system, along with tens of millions of dollars in direct profit, right into the hands of a shell company registered under the very name of Tony Carmine. Her blade of words tore away the lieutenant's hypocritical mask of loyalty, shattering the malicious treasonous plot right before the shocked witness of the distinguished guest in the fiercely murderous glare of the underworld boss. The naked truth, just laid bare through every firm translated word of Elena, acted like a spark thrown directly into a powder keg, entirely incinerating the hypocritical mask of loyalty that the Lieutenant Tony Carmine had painstakingly disguised for so long. Realizing the overthrow scheme to usurp tens of millions of dollars along with the control of the crucial seaport system had collapsed into pieces right before his eyes, Tony's sinister gaze suddenly flared with the bloodshot streaks of a wild beast backed into a corner. With nothing left to lose, he ignored the sky-high fury of the oligarch Volkov, abruptly took a step back, and waved his arm to signal his loyal henchmen swarming outside to violently rebel. The solid oak doors of the conference room were instantly kicked open, and dozens of cold, dark gun barrels aimed straight at the center of the negotiation table, tearing through the quiet. atmosphere with deafening blasts and the sound of shattering glass violently spraying all across the marble floor. A lightning-fast clash, reeking heavily of death and the brutal violence of the underworld, officially erupted right inside the lair of the Marcone family. Amidst that frantic storm of bullets, Boss Vincent showed no signs of panic or surprise, for his old fox brain had long anticipated this dirty chess move from the very moment he established the blood pact with his female interpreter. Quick as a flash, Vincent lunged to fully embrace Elena's shoulders, using his sturdy back and the broad chest of a Mafia leader to provide absolute, safe cover for her, while roaring orders for his elite bodyguard unit to cover Mr. Volkov's retreat deep into a blind corner. From secret passageways hidden behind massive bookshelves, a multitude of gunmen absolutely loyal to Vincent's throne flooded out in unison like ghosts, completely overwhelming the rebel faction with superior firepower and the iron discipline of a true empire. In the span of a mere few breathtaking minutes, the roaring sound of weaponry was gradually silenced, giving way to agonizing groans and the acrid smell of gunpowder rushing straight into their lungs. The riot network that Tony had painstakingly arranged was completely crushed beneath the iron hand of the supreme leader, subduing all the traitors and clearing the way for the most brutal sentence preparing to crash down upon their heads. As the acrid gun smoke slowly dissipated amidst the ruins of the high-end conference room, the bloody rebellion, ignited by Tony Carmine, had officially been ground to dust under the ruthless boot heels of Boss Vincent. Two burly bodyguards locked Tony's arms tight, slamming the treacherous lieutenant's knees down onto the shattered glass fragments on the marble floor, stripping away all weapons and the power he had once used to subvert the family. Vincent slowly walked over, his cold ash-gray eyes carrying not a single ray of pity, directly issuing the words to strip all privileges from the man who had dared to stab him in the back, handing him over to the henchmen to be handled according to the most brutal laws of the underworld. But the most horrifying sentence tonight was not meant for Tony, but was aimed straight at the man cowering and hiding behind the oak desk, the fraudster Marcus Thorne. Screams of pure agony rang out as Marcus was violently dragged from his hiding spot, thrown forcefully onto the floor, and forced to grovel right beneath the tips of Elena's high heels. Vastly different from his arrogant demeanor hurling insults at her in the corridor corner during the gala night, Marcus was now nothing more than a pathetic creature, his entire body trembling uncontrollably, cold sweat pouring out to drench a face utterly drained of every drop of blood. Vincent stepped up to stand immediately behind Elena, transmitting to her a dominant, authoritative strength, and then calmly declared that the life of the cruel man who had ruined her life all those years ago now rested entirely in her hands to decide. With just a slight nod from her, the gang's assassins would immediately send him to hell without leaving behind a single trace. The atmosphere was so quiet that one could clearly hear the rapid breaths of the man waiting for his judgment from the Grim Reaper. But contrary to the expectation of a blood-soaked revenge, Elena dropped her gaze to look down upon her old partner with absolute supreme disgust, and she chose a completely different path. She knew clearly that if she let the gang eliminate Marcus, she would only satisfy her temporary rage but could never wash away the humiliating stain of being named a financial fraudster. Pulling from her briefcase the stack of bank statements showing the dirty money flow and the undeniable ironclad evidence she had painstakingly gathered from the shell company, Elena coldly threw them straight into Marcus' face, simultaneously offering him a sharp fountain pen that, with the firm tone of a language queen who had just reclaimed her throne, she forced that cowardly man to write and sign with his own hand a detailed confession of the entire truth regarding the fraud charade from many years prior, clearly noting every trick he had used to steal the assets and wrongfully accuse her. Elena's blade of words and psychological punishment dealt a fatal blow to Marcus' final shred of pride, causing him to tremblingly take the pen, obediently writing the lines confessing to every crime in exchange for his garbage life, thereby officially handing the resilient former interpreter the key to wash clean her honest reputation and entirely cast off the dark ghosts of the past. Right as the final messy signature, stained with Marcus' humiliation, marked the confession paper, Vincent gave a subtle wave of his hand, signaling his subordinates to drag the traitors out of sight, leaving behind a room littered with crystal shards and the acrid smell of gunpowder. In the blink of an eye, the elite bodyguard unit swiftly cleaned away the remnants of the bloody coup, returning the inherent majestic silence to the sanctuary of the Marcone family. Standing quietly in a safe corner under strict protection, The Russian oligarch Mikhail Volkov had fully witnessed the entire earth-shattering overthrow that had just taken place. Instead of being terrified by the brutality surrounding him, a seasoned man who had risen from the harshness of the whites now business world like Volkov appeared incredibly impressed by Elena's ironclad bravery and the absolutely uncompromising fairness of boss Vincent. For this highly suspicious billionaire, a partner daring to sever his own treacherous right arm to protect the transparency of the contract was indeed an ally worthy of placing absolute trust in. Slowly walking over to the marble table that was now smoothly spread with an accurate Russian contract draft, Volkov cast his sharp eyes to scan over the clauses dividing the profits at an absolutely fair 50-50 ratio, alongside the recognition of parallel seaport control that Elena had just resiliently defended. Without a single moment of further hesitation, Volkov decisively pulled the diamond-encrusted fountain pen from his suit pocket, powerfully placing his honorable signature strokes down at the final section of the legal document worth tens of millions of dollars, officially marking the birth of one of the most solid alliances in the underworld. Once all procedures were complete, the veteran oligarch did not turn to shake boss Vincent's hand right away, but instead walked straight to stand before the young female interpreter waiting quietly nearby. With a profound respect rarely seen in those filled with power, Volkov extended his rough hand to grasp the slender yet deeply resolute hand of Elena. He spoke in a warm, deep voice in his native tongue, smiling to praise the extraordinary courage of the girl who had used her very life to gamble for the truth, simultaneously and affectionately calling her the sturdiest bridge he had ever had the fortune to cross throughout his journey of building his empire. That sincere compliment echoing through the room that had just survived a storm of blood was not only absolute validation of the outstanding talent of a language expert, but also the most brilliant halo illuminating the moment Elena officially reclaimed the glory and dignity that had been buried in the dark years. A few weeks passed since the bloody negotiation night that shook the underworld, and the brilliant light of the truth had finally pierced through the dark fog that had once ensnared the resilient female interpreter's life. Thanks to the massive remuneration and the medical intervention from top specialists that boss Vincent secretly arranged, Elena's mother's illness had made incredibly miraculous progress, acting like a true miracle in this mortal world. Standing outside the hospital corridor bathed in warm morning sunlight, Elena could not hold back her tears of happiness as she looked through the clear glass window, seeing her beloved mother no longer submerged in a deep coma tied to dry ventilator machines, but capable of sitting up on her own, smiling peacefully to embrace the fierce rhythm of life slowly reviving in her veins. At the same time, the deeply humiliating confession of her old partner, Marcus Thorne, along with the countless ironclad proofs of the dirty money flow that she had gambled her life to reclaim, were submitted to the Supreme Professional Ethics Review Board. The truth behind the shocking financial fraud case from years ago was finally brought to light, utterly shattering the cruel prejudices and bitter fabrications that had once pushed her to the very bottom of the swamp of disdain. The authorities not only officially issued a public document vindicating her, but they also immediately restored her international interpreter license with absolute respect. Holding in her hand the prestigious certificate card bearing her complete real name, something that had been ruthlessly stripped away and thought to have permanently turned to dust, Elena felt a fierce current of resurrecting power surging and flowing through every single cell. Utterly casting off the submissive shell of an invisible waitress who always had to keep her face bowed in resignation, along with the filthy black apron at the underground club, she now donned a sharp business suit, confidently taking proud strides upon the bustling avenue of the city. For the first time, after long, grueling years of having to hide like a rat beneath the unjust shadows of a dark past, Elena could finally, proudly hold her head high, bravely breathe in the air of freedom, and proudly live a complete life through the brilliant identity of a true language queen. Stepping out of the glass doors of the Central Hospital into a brilliantly glowing twilight evening, Elena stopped in her tracks upon seeing a familiar tall figure standing quietly beside a luxurious black car. It was Vincent Marcone, but he no longer carried the suffocating, murderous demeanor of an underworld boss forever hidden in blood-soaked schemes. Thanks to the legal and transparent maritime shipping contract that she had wagered her life to help him secure, Vincent now radiated the calm and dignified aura of a True businessmen bravely stepping out into the light that those ash-gray eyes that had once made so many tremble in fear now shone with a profound gentleness and deep appreciation when directed toward the resilient woman who had saved his entire empire. He slowly stepped forward, offering her neither a cold employment contract nor a massive stack of cash, but steadily extended his large hand out before her. In his warmest and most sincere voice, Vincent did not ask Elena to continue working as a hired interpreter under his command anymore, but gently extended an invitation for her to walk the long road ahead alongside him as a true companion, a lifelong parallel partner, to together build the bridges connecting two worlds that were originally vastly different. Elena's small hand trembled slightly. With emotion, then gently placed itself entirely into the steady palm of that man, officially closing the dark days to open a new, more brilliant, and more peaceful chapter for both souls that once bore heavy scars. The story of Elena's journey to reclaim the light brings us a deeply humane lesson regarding the power of resilience and the courage to protect the truth. In a life filled with hardships and temptations, sometimes we are forced to shrink ourselves or wear invisible masks to survive, but as long as you never abandon your dignity and your belief in your own brilliance, the light of glory will certainly return. Words can be the sharpest weapons used to destroy a person, but sincerity and kindness are the sturdiest bridges to connect souls together, helping us overcome all thorny adversities. Dear viewers, how did you feel about today's story? And did you see the reflection of yourselves or those around you in this journey of rising above the storm? We very much desire to listen to the feelings from deep within your hearts, so please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section below. Do not forget to hit subscribe to our channel, like, and share to listen to many fascinating videos every day. Finally, wishing everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace every single day. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.